All right, welcome everyone. I'm Matt Kropp, and we're really excited to have you all with us today for this presentation on kind of the some of the more research related side of employee ownership. What we know. Really excited to have Joseph Blasi and Adria Scharf from Rutgers University to kind of guide us through that. Before we get into their presentation, I figured I would start with a brief overview of our work here at the Vermont Employee Ownership Center. We're hosting this session, and just to give a little overview of when we're talking about employee ownership, what it is, and kind of what we do to promote and foster that here in the state of Vermont. So we've been around since 2001. We're a nonprofit based in the Old North End of Burlington, Vermont, and we were modeled after the very first employee ownership center. There's now many of them around the country, thanks to the work of the Employee Ownership Expansion Network. But we were modeled after the first one in Ohio, and our work is really kind of connected to the economic development sphere here. Aiming to make the impact of employee ownership a whole variety of impacts as in Vermont's economy. So there are three of us. I'm the executive director. Ryan Thornton, who's in the background here, helping with the webinar and watching for questions and comments from you all, is our communications and outreach coordinator. And Annie Winkler is our program and operations generalist, who does technical assistance, database stuff, all various manner of general things. So when we talk about employee ownership, and Adria and Joseph are going to be covering a number of different angles on it, but for the Employee Ownership Center, we talk about broad-based employee ownership. So this is defined as forms of ownership that provide a path to co-ownership for all full-time equivalent employees. So not just a few key employees or other things like that, but really everyone who works at a company from the C-suite to the shop floor has a chance to sort of share in the success of the company through ownership. And there are a variety of ways that Joseph and Adria will talk about that this can happen, but that is the kind of core of our work. And so how we then promote this stuff, and we really have four areas of activity. We start with thinking about outreach, right? We want to make sure that folks know what this is, that this is on the menu for business owners who are thinking about their exit, and entrepreneurs who are trying to think about starting starting a business. We want a strong ecosystem that supports employee ownership, whether that's policy, finance, other kind of elements of just the broader world that make sure that employee ownership is something that can thrive here in Vermont. We provide education and resources for folks who are going through the conversion process. So if you're interested in your company becoming employee owned, we will work with the employee group. We'll refer professionals who have the expertise that's necessary to make it happen. We'll provide training for folks, et cetera. And then once folks are employee owned, we provide a number of opportunities to get involved in the community of employee ownership through peer groups, through educational resources, and through our annual conference, which is our kind of big keystone event. That annual conference is coming up this year on May 31st, and it really kind of brings together a whole variety of different stakeholders in the employee ownership world, right? The folks who are doing it at ESOPs, the ESOP committee members, ESOP leaders, these bigger companies doing professional development, folks from the worker co-op world, similarly, both to connect and network and learn key things. And then business owners and key employees who are thinking about making the transition to employee ownership. So it's really provides information and useful experiences for all of these groups to help make sure that both existing employee-owned companies are thriving and new companies are considering this path. And then finally, our funding as a nonprofit that does economic development work, we get some funding through the state of Vermont. Sponsorships and event registrations are about a quarter of our budget, so that conference is a big key part of our work. And then we have a variety of other kind of grant income and a little bit of consulting income that rounds out sort of how we fund this work and keep it going and expanding through the years. So finally, if you're interested in keeping up with the VEOC, you can sign up for our newsletter. This is a QR code, or you can head to our website, veoc.org. And we'd always love to be in contact, in touch, and welcome any questions or other things that folks have that might come up. So I will stop the screen share now and turn it over to Joseph and Adria to introduce themselves and really get into the core of our conversation today.
Hi, I'm Joseph Blasi, and I'm a professor at Rutgers and director of the institute here. And let me introduce Adria Scharf, who is a lecturer at Rutgers and our new associate director of the institute. I should say, after 30 years at Rutgers, I will be stepping down as director of the institute and vice professor in June of 2025. And Adria will be a key part of the new leadership group. Okay, just want to give a brief overview of the Institute. We spent 30 years building it, but not just as sort of a Rutgers institution. We want it to be used as a public utility by colleges and universities around the country. We have 2 annual conferences for research fellows. They're not open to the public. We aim to keep them small. If you're from a college or university, you have our invitation to come to these conferences as a guest. We sponsor a competitive fellowship program patterned after the Andrew W. Mellon program in the humanities, not to compare us to Mellon, but patterned after it. We provide about $200,000 to $400,000 a year to 15 to 30 fellows annually to do unrestricted research. And we spent a lot of our time acquiring and creating data sets that scholars at Rutgers, that the over 200 research fellows can use. An example is the general social survey that we fund every 4 years. Now we have 6 national random samples on all forms of profit and equity shares in the United States. We'll go to the next slide. And I'll go over to Adria.
Thank you, Joseph. Hello, one and all. It's so wonderful to be here. My name is Adria Scharf, and I'm an associate director working closely with Joseph at the Institute for the Study of Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing at Rutgers. Really excited to be with you today, and just want to thank Matt and Ryan and acknowledge the Vermont Employee Ownership Center for its really incredible work, longstanding work over decades, planting very important seeds for these concepts in your state. So before we kind of dive in some depth into research findings, and we want to share some wonderful teaching resources with you, before we do that, we wanted to take just a couple of minutes just to kind of step back and introduce some of the core concepts conceptually before we go any deeper. And Matt did a wonderful job a minute ago beginning this. So building on what Matt has already said about broad-based employee ownership, we define the concept of employee share ownership kind of capaciously as a very broad term that encompasses any arrangement in which employees own shares of the companies where they work, or the right to the value of those shares. And it's interesting, different people, different groups use different words to describe this basic idea. Some people may call this worker ownership, employee ownership. Some people say broad-based equity compensation. And each of those terms does have a slightly different connotation, but they all reflect the same underlying idea, the idea of employees having an equity stake, employees having a share of ownership. So in an employee-owned company, employees own a significant percentage of the company. So if employees own, say, 51% of shares, then they are the majority owner of that company. When employees own 100% of shares, then they are the sole owners. And just to state the obvious, this idea of an employee-owned company, the idea that there can be companies that are owned by their workers, it represents an alternative and a more economically inclusive alternative to some of the more predominant models of business ownership that exist. And then lastly, as Matt said so clearly, it's really important to differentiate broad-based forms of employee ownership. And to us, broad-based forms of employee ownership describe businesses in which most or all of the employees, including the quote unquote lower tier employees or lowest wage employees, are owners or have the right to ownership. So in a broad-based employee owned company, you might find, for example, the person who answers the phone, has a stock account, or the frontline employee or the truck driver, et cetera, own shares of stock, and the opportunity to be an owner is not restricted to particular categories of employees. It's not restricted to, say, just the software engineers or just the senior managers. And this, of course, is important, this idea of broad-based employee ownership, because ownership confers rights. Most importantly, being an owner confers the rights to financial return, so the right to benefit financially from your ownership stake. So if you're interested in thinking about employee ownership as a tool for building wealth for kind of frontline lower wage workers who may not otherwise have the opportunity to do so, really important to be clear that you're interested in broad-based employee ownership. One more slide from me, and then I'll hand back to Joseph. So just super brief overview. There are 4 kind of broad buckets or types of employee share ownership that exist in the United States. The first is the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, or ESOP, which cover almost 14 million individuals. An ESOP is like employee ownership in the form of a retirement plan. It's the most prevalent type of broad-based employee ownership that exists in this country. It's a uniquely American form. I don't think there are any other countries in the world that have quite the same structure as we do with our ESOPs. They are broad-based by law. So because they're a pension, they're governed by pension law. You have to, if you're a company that adopts an ESOP, you don't have a lot of discretion. Like, you have to include most people, most of your employees on payroll. There's a few exceptions to that, collectively bargained employees, et cetera, but overall, it's a very inclusive, broad-based form. And importantly, in an ESOP, employees do not pay for the stock. The stock benefit is paid for by the company. So nothing comes out of employee paychecks. So there's more I could say, but we'll just stop there. So the ESOP, most prevalent form of broad-based employee ownership. Worker cooperatives, as many of you I'm sure know, are worker member owned and governed businesses in which members have an equal vote, and the members or the worker owners share in the profit, which is often called a surplus. Employee ownership trusts are a relatively new form of employee ownership in the United States. They're much more common in the United Kingdom, but there's a lot of growing interest in this form. An employee ownership trust is a type of perpetual purpose trust in which the trust owns the company for the benefit of the employees, and you can do flexible things like you can incorporate an environmental commitment or other sort of components of the mission to this sort of structure. And importantly, with an employee ownership trust, the trust owns it in perpetuity. So it's an asset lock. It protects the company from being bought by an outside buyer. Lastly, broad-based equity compensation is a huge umbrella term in itself, and it includes lots of different things from stock options to employee stock purchase plans to stock grants. But basically, equity compensation just means stock-based compensation. And equity compensation plans may be designed to include few, some, or all employees. And we estimate that there are over 10 million employees covered. Joseph, handing back to you.
Okay, so I want to talk very briefly about our research, and I'm going to do it really briefly because we want to save time for questions. So the Institute is studying through research everything from grants of stock and stock options at Google or a large publicly traded company, on the spectrum all the way to a pure democratic worker cooperative, and everything in between, all forms of equity and profit shares in between. We have over 250 research fellows from the fellowship program we've now had for almost 20 years. And we emphasize a lot mentoring young doctoral candidates and postdocs and assistant professors. 90% of the young professors we've mentored who wanted to get tenure have gotten tenure. So that's something that we're really proud of. So we try to engage some large social issues, how firms function and succeed, how workers achieve maximum engagement, what's the impact of shares on the future of wages and wealth accumulation, what is the relevance to gender and the racial wealth gap, how do policies hinder and encourage shares. So we'll go to the next slide, and I just want to talk sort of briefly about some of the overall research findings. I want to emphasize before I do this, though, that after this is my 46th year in research on employee share ownership, that it's not really necessary that in every study or in general for society that employee ownership or employee-owned firms always has to have better effects than non-employee-owned firms or non-employee ownership arrangements. If we at least find the same effects, one could organize the entire economy based on employee ownership arrangements. It's not always necessary to be better, although we do observe a lot of improvements. So at the firm level, we find better company performance on average through modest productivity increases and pretty significant lower turnover effects. These are almost always in together with the support of corporate culture. Let's go back, yeah. And we find better employment stability and survival, certainly of closely held firms. As I said, these effects depend on a support of corporate culture and a bundle of HR practices. We do find, it's good news, that employee-owned firms tend to adopt the supportive corporate practices more often than not. Obviously, a big part of the firm impact here is retiring business owners. More than 51% of small business owners under 500 employees report that they're close to retirement. This is the main creator of ESOPs today. At the level of workers, we're finding greater worker loyalty, willingness to work hard, mutual monitoring, willingness to stay with the firm, willingness to participate in innovative activities. But these worker effects interact with there being fair wages and short-term profit sharing. We also find better job quality. We'll go to the next slide and just general wrap up of what we find in terms of research. In terms of wages and wealth, most economists would predict, certainly with regards to ESOPs, that you would see significant wage substitution. We have multiple studies. We do not observe this. We observe that most ESOPs have separate, diversified 401k plans. There are special challenges for co-ops, which operate more in difficult and challenging labor markets than ESOPs do. In ESOPs, we observe major improvements in wealth after 10 years in the ESOP, but again, we see industry differences. Large amounts of wealth accumulation in manufacturing firms, smaller amounts in industries which tend to have lower margins. The W.K. Kellogg Foundation has supported some significant qualitative research and quantitative research, and we do find that ESOPs especially do begin to close the gender wealth gap and the racial wealth gap compared to non-ESOP female and employees of color in the United States relative to national medians. But I do want to say that employee ownership does not eliminate the racial and the gender wealth gap. That's a bigger societal issue. In terms of policies, the Institute does not endorse legislation, but we've had a major role in policy analysis. I was the advisor to Secretary Clinton's presidential campaign on these issues, as well as was the advisor to, at the time, candidate Biden's campaign on these issues. Let's go to the next slide. And these are some of the databases that we've created and that are available for researchers to use. National Bureau for Economic Research Shared Capitalism Project. We got $1 million grant from the Rockefeller Russell Sage Foundation. Many of you know that the General Social Survey is the largest individual survey other than the survey, other than the census and the survey of consumer finances funded by the US government. Probably our newest research effort is the Shares Laboratory, where with the support of 6 financial services firms, we're producing a report every 12 weeks on trends in equity compensation in the country. I'm not going to go through each of these data sets, but we are constantly acquiring and curating and creating data sets that many of the research fellows use and are available to faculty members on this call. We spend a lot of time supporting colleagues and help PhD and master's students from universities around the country. And we invite you to connect to all of the research fellows and to view the Institute as a resource for your college or university. Let's go to the next slide.
Joseph, I think we wanted to stop here and pause for questions.
Great. Okay, so we'll pause.
Any questions, thoughts, anyone?
So if there are questions, either feel free to unmute yourself or throw something in the chat. And also feel free to throw something in the chat at any point during the conversation as well.
Marian?
Marian.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there are certain industries in which this is more prevalent or popular, and if the size of the companies. I don't see large companies doing it. So who are your customers, I guess, in essence?
Well, certainly among closely held companies, and we have better data on ESOPs, significant and majority and 100% employee ownership is prevalent among manufacturing, construction, and professional services. Although earlier claims that employee share ownership would not work in certain industries have not really held up to analysis. So, for example, there have been earlier claims which would suggest you wouldn't see this in supermarkets, yet we see a lot of 100% employee ownership in major supermarket chains around the United States. Not here in the Northeast, but more in the Midwest and the South. So those predictions by scholars, which were not based on empirical data, by the way, do not really hold up. As far as stock market companies, no, there are several hundred, I think about 600 stock market companies on the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. I'm talking only about ESOPs, where we have really solid Department of Labor data, where on average there's a 2 to 3% of total shares outstanding in an ESOP. But the point I want to leave you with is that all our data indicates that, for example, a 1 or 2% ESOP at ExxonMobil can deliver around $150,000 to $200,000 on average of employee share ownership per employee, versus a 100% ESOP in a manufacturing firm delivering about $150,000 to $200,000 on average. It's not fair to ignore public stock market company ESOPs and equity compensation programs. They are a major part of this discussion, whether one likes it or not. Thanks.
Thank you. Good answer. Thank you.
All right, so I had a question from Tina in the chat. Curious the main differences between the ESOP and employee-owned trust. Adria, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I'm happy to. I'm sorry, who asked the question?
Tina.
Tina, okay. Hey, Tina. The difference, so an ESOP so there's a number of differences. And the first thing I'll say is that with an ESOP, because it's governed by ERISA, so governed by pension law, the employees have a lot of protections and are kind of protected by the Department of Labor. That is a double-edged sword from some people's perspective. On the one hand, it's really important that employees have protected rights. On the other hand, the way we've structured the ESOP makes it administratively very complex and some argue burdensome. So an ESOP is a much more complicated undertaking to lift off within a company. in order to kind of like jump through all the hoops and follow all the necessary steps. One of the upsides within ESOP, however, is that within ESOP, each individual employee gets an individual ESOP account. And typically the company then allocates shares into those accounts every year. So each year, and every employee will get an annual statement saying like how many shares they have, what the share price is, what the value of their individual account is. And so there's this sense that it's really a tool for individual financial asset building. And there's no predicting, there's a lot of uncertainty, but there are certainly many, many examples of longer term employees in successful ESOP companies accumulating really significant amounts of retirement wealth. By contrast, with an EOT, the individual employees do not have individual stock accounts. It's more of a collective model where this trust owns the company, and then annually the trustees of the trust will make decisions about how to allocate the profits in a way that will benefit the employee owners. And there's a lot more variability in terms of what those look like company to company. In some employee-owned EOT companies, every employee owner might get an extra contribution into their 401k account. Others might just pass out kind of a cash profit sharing. But there's potential there for companies to do kind of more creative things. If there's a surplus, they could maybe, this is a completely imaginary thing, but they could like create a childcare center or something, like there's a sort of a larger sort of spectrum of possibilities in terms of the company's freedom to choose how to invest the proceeds, whereas with an ESOP, each individual accumulates stock over time. In EOT, some business owners like better because, again, there's fewer regulations, less of an administrative burden. But the flip side of that, again, is that employees have fewer protections.
I have just one follow-on question, and thanks for that answer. That was very helpful because I haven't really heard of the trust concept before. But it sounds like it would need to be, the company needs to be driving profits in order to figure out how to allocate such profits, right? So if you have sort of a long-standing company that's sort of break even and you're exploring employee stock ownership because, let's say some of the owners are retirement age, how do you, what would your suggestion be in that type of scenario?
In terms of ESOP versus EOT?
Yes.
Yeah, I see Joseph hands up, so I'm going to hand off to Joseph in like a nanosecond.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
But typically we do, for any employee-owned company to transition into employee ownership, there's a checklist. It's really important for the company to be absolutely financially stable, to be generating consistent revenue, and to be profitable. And Joseph, I'll hand off to Joseph at this point. With an ESOP, you have to actually do a feasibility study. I'm not sure about with an EOT.
Yeah, let me just say that after being involved in policy now for about 30 years, it's my personal view that all majority owned, employee owned firms should be pretty much evenly regulated by the federal government. So for example, I think it's weird that worker cooperatives and EOTs do not require a independent third-party valuation of the shares when they're purchased. So we are in a part of history right now where ESOPs are properly regulated in terms of fairness, and worker cooperatives and EOTs are virtually zero regulated. I'll just leave it at there, and we'll move on to the next slide.
Thank you.
One more question here before we do, from Anna Wardwell, and actually this was something I was thinking I might bring up as well. So good synchronicity here. Can you talk more about and recommend resources on the supportive HR practices referenced in the supporting documents? I'd love to learn more. So that's from Anna, and then my add to that would be, in some of the sort of like general overviews of research I've read, kind of one of the narratives that's come out has been like, you might see a little bit of performance improvement with just employee ownership, but that you layer employee ownership with high participation management practices like open book management and other things like that, and that's really where you see the kind of sum being greater than the parts. So I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit.
Sure. And absolutely the case. We see the big turnover effects and the larger impacts on performance. So, for example, on productivity and even on mutual monitoring between employees with a bundle of HR practices. And we've sent around a 3-page summary that we did for Morgan Stanley, kind of pulling together all of our data on this. We have a bunch of research briefs on this that we prepared, mostly written for CEOs of worker co-ops and ESOP companies that we can share. And I have prepared an email which has most of our books and most of our empirical research projects in one big hefty email that I can forward to you if you will provide Matt with your email address. We can share with you a lot of these 2- and 3-page research briefs that are good for teaching. But Adria, who is in charge of our curriculum library on employee ownership, which puts together materials for business schools and social science departments, will talk about this in detail. But yes, we'll share stuff on the supportive HR practices in great detail with copies of all the studies if you supply Matt with your email.
Great. Okay, onward. And we'll have more questions in just a few minutes. But let's move on now. If I can get my, hold on here. All right, there we go. PowerPoint's a little jumpy this morning. So Matt and Ryan asked us to share some specific teaching resources, which I was so delighted to get this request and so delighted to learn of some of the good work that VEOC is already doing and doing outreach to universities, because one of our goals at the Rutgers Institute is to see employee ownership taught much more broadly at the university level in all fields, but in particular in business schools and MBA programs. We want to see many more business school students and other university college graduates coming out with some sense for the potential and the mechanics of these very important tools. So I'm going to share with you about 4 different resources that we have developed, and in the spirit that Joseph said before about we want you to see us as your public utility, just echoing that, like all of these resources we make available to you to use freely, to share with colleagues. We would be delighted if you find some of these resources helpful. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is this brand new massive open online course. We just launched it this year. This is a MOOC, it's a video course. It's called Our Share: Employee Ownership as a Wealth Sharing Tool. And it's hosted on the Coursera platform. Coursera is the largest digital education platform in the world. And this is a course that consists of 38 bite-sized videos, like videos of maybe 2 to 5 minutes in length, organized into lessons, organized into modules. The videos were recorded by 15 different incredible experts. And really our aim with this was to introduce the concept of employee ownership to people with no prior background. We wanted this to be truly accessible. We wanted to explain how employee ownership works and to explain how it can potentially serve as a tool for wealth sharing with research evidence, but again, accessibly. And this is a course that can be integrated into syllabi. I'm using it in a course I'm teaching for the Human Resources Department at Rutgers this semester. It can also just be offered as like an extra or a supplement to a course, and the students seem to really appreciate it. There are 15 learning objectives, but basically the people who take this class and complete it will end up being fluent in worker ownership. They will be able to speak very knowledgeably about employee ownership, know its benefits, its risks, the primary types. And for people who are actually practitioners interested in thinking about adopting employee ownership in their company, this course teaches them like the important first questions to ask, and then points them to the state centers or the other organizations that they could go to, kind of like to really shepherd them through the process. So let's see. So that's again our share on Coursera course, and it's free. The full content is free. The only potential fee is for people who complete the course and wish to get an actual formal certificate of completion that they can like post on LinkedIn or on their resume. Then there's just a little teeny fee. I think it's like $40 or $50, but all of the content is available for free. Second, this is our curriculum library for employee ownership, which we refer to as CLEO, C-L-E-O. You can find it at cleo.rutgers.edu. And this is basically a big resource library of teaching and research materials about employee ownership. It was designed specifically for academics of all backgrounds. So it is meant to be an easy to navigate place for college and university professors to go to find all sorts of resources, from sample syllabi to free downloadable case studies to videos, journal articles, etc. And again, cleo.rutgers.edu. And this online library is used by many other folks, including practitioners and people, workers and business owners, but primarily it was designed again for educators. Third, on the CLEO website, I created a speakers bureau, and this is a teaching resource for any university level, college or university level teacher. You can schedule a guest speaker for your class, literally any class. And we have this phenomenal list of experts. Some of the kind of leading experts in the whole world on employee ownership are willing to come to your class virtually and present and give a talk or hold a participatory discussion with your class. And our guest speakers have spoken to all sorts of programs, from like sociology classes to lots of different business school, MBA type classes, etc. And these guest speakers will tailor what they say to your particular class topic and your discipline. So again, free guest speakers. And then lastly, just lifting up that on the CLEO website, we have a lot of free, fully downloadable case studies of employee-owned companies. We have about 40 different full text case studies, which you can literally just click on and download for your class. Many of them have discussion questions at the end. I pasted the cover of one of the case studies, which happens to be of a Vermont physical therapy cooperative, PT360. But our case studies cover all different types of employee ownership. A number describe ESOP companies. Let me see what time it is here, Joseph. Right, we got a little time. I think what I want to do, actually, what I want to do, friends, is I'm going to stop the share, but then we're going to share again. And what I would like to do here is just take you very briefly to the CLEO website, because I just want to point you to exactly where you can find all of this information once our webinar is over. Okay, can you see my website, my webpage now? Okay, great. So just wanted to take you like on the quickest imaginable like virtual tour. This is the CLEO website, again, cleo.rutgers.edu. And I just wanted to point you to up here on the upper right. If you go to this website, up here on the upper right is where you can get the guest speakers. And you can just like click here.
The vegetables, because I'm a pretty picky eater.
You're not a picky eater if you're health.
Not sure that was, okay. And then going back here to the kind of main page of CLEO, if you go down here to the lower left, this icon that says free case studies, that's where you can find lots and lots of free, fully downloadable case studies. Going back to the main page, over here on the right, you see there's a bunch of sample syllabi that other professors have developed that either touch on or really focus on employee ownership in some way in their courses. And if any of you teach a class that incorporates this idea, please, I'd be really delighted to share your syllabus as well.
Barbara,
And then here on right here, if you want to navigate to the Coursera course, you can do so just by clicking there, or alternatively, Google Coursera employee ownership, and you should be able to find it. And then lastly, if you are a teacher and you're planning your syllabus, and you really want to hone in on something specific, if you click on that advanced search button, you can really hone in. Like, we have all different formats. If you just want a case study, you know, in economics, you know, that focuses on whatever, something, collaboration or something, you can click on multiple different filter terms and really hone in on what you want. Okay, I will leave it at that. And I'm available if anybody ever gets confused or wants more guidance.
Great. Thank you, Adria. So yeah, so other, you know, opportunities for other questions or comments from folks. You know, happy to, you know, we've got a little bit of time for conversation and digging in here. So you know, yeah, feel free to again either put in the chat or unmute, and if we get and if there's,
And Matt?
Yep.
I wanted to just give Cecile Bettit a shout out. I don't know if she's still, oh yes, she is still here. Cecile is I believe is a fellow of the Rutgers Institute and has done incredible work studying one of the most democratic ESOP companies in the country, your very own Karis Reels of Vermont. So just wanted to recognize Cecile. And a minute before, I saw Steve Storkin, who leads the Employee Ownership Expansion Network. I think Steve is here as well.
I have a question for Joseph. Thanks for introducing me, Adria. I appreciate it. Joseph, what's the most recent study that's been done on the wealth and income inequality and what employee ownership does for that? I know there's been lots of work in that area, but is there a brand new study? Where would someone go to show the latest not numbers for effects?
Yes, we have a brand new study that Matt Mazowski, who is a newly graduated PhD in economics from Columbia, did, using the HRS, the Health and Retirement Study that the University of Michigan database puts together, following thousands and thousands of retirees, comparing retirees with ESOPs versus non-ESOPs. It's really quite a stunning study showing two main things. First of all, the wealth accumulation with ESOP retirees is double that of non-ESOP retirees. And secondly, there is more of an egalitarian effect among ESOP retirees in terms of wealth accumulation. I will send a copy of that. That's one of our small research briefs, 3-page research briefs, and I'll send a copy of that to Matt for distribution. Let me also underline that the deadline for our research fellowships advertised in the Chronicle of Higher Education has now been extended to the end of February. We want to see more professors involved, and also underline that if you are a faculty member, you are invited as a guest to attend our January 12th to 14th Kelso workshop in sunny New Brunswick, New Jersey.
All right, so we have a question from Marion, you know, asking about what are the trends in the growth of employee-owned companies in the U.S.?
Okay, well, I will take that. We are observing a flat growth trend with closely held ESOPs. There's a lot of debate as to why this is taking place. There seem to be several factors in that in explaining this. One, and not necessarily in order. One, we are observing private equity firms picking off successful ESOPs. Secondly, and working in a different direction, we are observing ESOP firms merging with each other, which would depress the number of ESOPs. But as you would see, we are observing a growth in the population of workers in ESOPs and the wealth in ESOPs. So that's a countervailing impact. Thirdly, some view the strong amount of unclarity about certain ESOP regulations as having a depressing impact on this growth. Lastly, it's clear that retiring business owners are often self-financing a part of the debt in ESOP buyouts. And this needs to be addressed. There is an Employee Equity Investment Act before the Congress, supported by both Republican and Democratic members of the House and Senate, that would provide additional financing so that a retiring business owner could only take back part of the paper, do part of the self-financing on these deals. If you are interested in a detailed analysis on why Adria and I and Professor Doug Cruz think we see these both positive and negative effects on growth, it's just been published by the Journal of Participation, Employee Ownership, and Adria and I can share that with you. In terms of worker co-ops, I would say worker co-ops are going through a growth spurt, but because worker co-ops are relatively small in terms of the number of workers in worker co-ops, we're not seeing the impact of that growth spurt in terms of the overall population of employee share ownership. But in my view, worker co-ops are having their growth moment and their important relevance moment right now. And I think the next decade will be a very significant moment for worker cooperatives. It's hard to tell what will happen with employee ownership trusts in the United States. They are growing at about one a day in the United Kingdom. We'll have to see where that goes. But that's, I think, all I can say right now.
So one question I have is just as a practitioner, something I feel like we've been seeing in the last few years has been some experiments around kind of employee-owned holding companies that are privately held but might be acquiring or having multiple companies under sort of one umbrella, where maybe the employees are part of the ESOP of the the holding company rather than the individual company or other things like that. Is there any kind of recent research on that trend or any kind of insights into that as we are sort of, again, it's something we're seeing it feels like we're seeing it more as folks are experimenting with that.
I agree. There's interest in research. And in fact, I was just talking with one of our new fellows literally on Friday about an idea for undertaking some new study of ESOP holding companies. So anecdotally, I agree with you. It seems to really be something that's and it's a trend, and it seems to be advantageous hypothetically in a number of ways. In one way, it can potentially give smaller companies that would not otherwise have the capacity to adopt an ESOP on their own, could give employees of those companies access to the ESOP if they kind of get folded into this holding company umbrella. But I don't know of an actual study. I don't know, Joseph, if you do. I know one may be coming out soon. That's all I'll say.
So we have a question from John Abrams. With the recent trend of private equity buying ESOPs, sometimes against their will, is this leading to greater attraction to worker co-ops and EOTs?
Sorry, greater traction?
Or greater attraction because of perhaps because it's and maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of what makes ESOPs potentially more easier to acquire than the other models in your answer.
Well, S corporation ESOPs do not have to pay income taxes at the federal and normally at the state level either. And so these tend to be very cash rich companies that are well positioned to acquire or invest in new technology, et cetera. And so yes, private equity and other outside buyers often will see S corporation ESOPs as an attractive acquisition. And the thing with the ESOP is and any trustee of an ESOP has to take seriously an outside offer because they need to act in the fiduciary interest of the shareholders, if that makes sense. And so if an outside buyer puts a really generous offer on the table, it can be really hard for an ESOP trustee then to turn that away, given that they have to act in their fiduciary capacity. Joseph, anything else?
No, I'll just add that there have been situations of interest on the part of private equity in broad-based employee share ownership. And the Institute sponsors an annual conference where partners of private equity firms who have included broad-based employees in broad-based profit sharing and employee ownership deals present to partners of private equity firms who are curious about these deal structures. It's the Institute's Wall Street event. It is now in its 6th year, and I will share with Matt the link. If you're interested in this, you can take a look at it.
John, did you want to follow up on that question?
Actually, I wanted to ask a different question. Thanks for that answer. Are either of you familiar with team shares? Can you talk about it a little bit and what you think about it?
I am familiar with team shares only by looking at several of their press releases, so I don't know enough about them to make any judgment. I will say that what I consider the Institute's kind of Wall Street specialty conference, the private equity symposium, had team shares as a presenter, and I will send the link. You can go there and see them present in more detail than is available in their press releases, their story, and receive questions and answers. I did not attend our Wall Street event this year, so I can't comment further. But I will say
that would be great to see. Thanks if you can send that. Yeah.
There are a ton of investment type firms out there doing employee ownership, and they're multiplying, and it's hard to have any good take on the variations between them.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up, John, because I've also, have had probably a half dozen people email me with my employee ownership center hat on, saying, "Oh, I read an article about team shares. What do you think about them?" And I'm probably in the same boat as Joseph. I've had a brief conversation, and have sort of a sense of the mechanics of it, but not enough to feel like I can confidently reproduce and describe exactly how it works. So that's definitely one I've been curious about as well. So I'll be very interested to watch that.
Yeah, me too. What I've seen is that they have bought a number of blue collar companies that would have probably had no other buyer and done a great job with that. But then the question remains, they have this long-term 20 years to 80% employee ownership. Will that really happen? And that's my question anyway.
Great. Thank you, John. Go ahead.
And you have other phenomena. So you have Ownership Works, which is a nonprofit developing basically right now equity compensation programs in portfolio companies for private equity firms. And they are also presenting at our conference. And they have a different model right now, which is not an ESOP model. It's either a profit sharing model or equity compensation, grants of stock or stock options. But these are just two that have been in the press. There are a stunning number of new firms developing in this area, and they're happening faster than we could even form an opinion about them.
So we have a question from Marion here, and I'm conscious of time. We've got 5 minutes left. Why are trusts more popular in the UK versus the US?
Employee ownership trusts, I think, are more popular in the UK because the UK did not really have a kind of legal infrastructure that made the ESOP possible first. Secondly, to make ESOPs possible would have required far more policy and legal change in the UK. Thirdly, Graham Nuttall, who was the advisor to the UK Prime Minister on employee ownership, he and his colleagues did a lot of the pioneering work on employee ownership trusts, and they were the group that was advising the UK government. Next, I think employee ownership trusts were easily accepted by business people in the UK. I'm not sure what all the specific reasons are. We don't have any research. We don't have any research on that, but I think these are the reasons. Obviously, there is a debate right now happening in the employee ownership community, because while EOTs are growing at a very rapid pace in the UK, they provide essentially a profit-sharing cash dividend on an annual basis, but they do not provide the cumulative value in the market-based ongoing equity value of the firm that ESOPs provide. So there is a debate about which of these provides more wealth to employees. And there's no question that the ESOP model does provide more wealth to employees. On the other hand, there's no question that the EOT model is growing very rapidly in the UK.
So as we head towards closing, I'd maybe like to ask, almost, we've been talking about what do we know, but what are the things that we don't know that are on the research agenda that you'd like to see as the Institute continues to support this work, and what are the big outstanding questions for each of you in terms of employee ownership? Joseph, you want to go first, and then Adria?
I'll defer to Adria, and then I'll maybe make some comment.
Oh, goodness. For this, just speaking just for me personally, one, we don't really have the definitive study on the question of why are there so few ESOPs, which I feel like is a really important kind of field-making question that Joseph and I have kind of sketched out some preliminary answers for, but it would be good to have a systematic study to really weigh some of these hypotheses against one another. Secondly, I think the field has come so far in exploring and acknowledging kind of the variation by gender and race and other kind of positionalities in terms of, what does participation in ESOP mean for, a Black woman versus, a white man in a variety of different sectors. And I think there's a lot more still to be done in terms of fully exploring kind of that diversity of experience and the diversity of benefits. And then lastly, I myself, it's funny, this is like not a super highfalutin scholarly question, but I did a project last year that looked at documenting at a granular level worker cooperatives in the health and care sector. And it was interesting. It was qualitative research. It was not statistically complicated by any stretch. We just went deeply inside of organizations and really unpacked the mechanics and the mechanisms of how these more democratic alternatives actually have constructed themselves. And I actually feel like sometimes we talk about employee ownership up here and we don't get deep enough in. And when you actually get in at a level where you can actually explain the inner workings, I think it makes it easier for us as scholars to then kind of like explain out and create those ripple effects of introducing this model in a wider way. So I actually think more of that is still needed.
So what I would add here are two kind of quirky statements. And we've all heard cases, and in fact, really sort of heartwarming cases of persons, who've had, brain surgery and parts of their brains have to be removed or operated on, and yet they have a lot of significant functioning. And what we don't know is, how much hierarchy can you take out of an ESOP or an employee-owned firm, and have it still function well, if not maybe function better? The Institute has the Nobles Fellowships, which looks at less hierarchical organizations. We also don't know the opposite of what we've been talking about today. How many supportive HR practices can you subtract from an employee-owned firm and still get some incentive effect from employee ownership? I don't think we know the answer to that question. We do know that you get the better and more positive impacts and the larger impacts when you have the bundle of high performance HR practices combined with employee ownership profit sharing. We don't know how much you can subtract. And that's important, because the more employee ownership we get in the world, both in ESOPs and worker co-ops, there will be some management teams who are more subtractive on the HR side. It's just a matter of fact. Be careful of what you wish for.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and time with us today. This was a lot of fun, and I'm hopeful that perhaps next year we might have one of you come up to Vermont and do a little session in person. So, but in the meantime, thank you everyone for attending, and we'll send a follow-up email that both has the recording of this session as well as any of those materials that Joseph and Adria will supply us with. So it should be a nice little resource email coming your way. So yeah, again, thank you so much, and for folks in Vermont, if you have any other kind of questions or want to connect about employee ownership, my email is matt@veoc.org, and always happy to have a conversation.
Thank you guys
so much. Yeah, thank you. Nice visiting with you, and
Wonderful
thank
to
you
be
to the
with
Vermont
you.
Center and the Employee Ownership Expansion Network. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.